Hi, this is Craig Robinson from Robinson and Casey. One of the biggest hesitations that families have with filing a Marchman Act is the involvement of law enforcement in the process. And this is something that I do have to say that most of the time is not really necessary. And what I mean by that is that law enforcement can be utilized and can intervene in certain scenarios during the course of a Marchman Act if necessary. But generally, what we find is that when someone understands and knows that they are now in a court proceeding where law enforcement could be utilized, whether that be to actually pick them up and bring them in for an involuntary assessment or for treatment, or let's just say they're held in contempt of court as a result of their noncompliance with a court order, and they know that there will be consequences and that ultimately law enforcement will be able to come out and pick them up and either take them back to a treatment facility or to take them to jail potentially, which really doesn't happen all that often. Usually, the psychology of that tends to keep people on the right pathway. So I'd say the great majority of our cases generally avoid law enforcement involvement in them. As I've talked about before, the Marchman Act is a civil process. When we talk about law enforcement being involved, what we're really talking about is not punishment of the individual, not pressing criminal charges against the individual, but actually utilizing law enforcement to potentially keep that individual safe. You know, what the court recognizes in a Marchman Act proceeding is that in the court's eyes, if a petition is granted, that person has been deemed at risk. They've really been deemed to be at risk of substantial harm to themselves or those around them. So, given that finding, what the court really wants to do in utilizing law enforcement is take every precaution to make sure that the individual stays safe. Sometimes the only way to do that is to utilize jail in order to force an individual's compliance. But again, I do have to say, this kind of a situation, as much as families really worry about it on the front end, rarely, really, in our cases, do we have to utilize law enforcement for contempt proceedings or to intervene on an individual to bring them to treatment. Once an individual knows that the Marchman Act is in place, usually things tend to go smoothly from that point forward.